Hello, everyone. I'm Brenda Morris. I'm the Director of Produce Safety for AFDO, and I'd like to welcome you to the AFDO Produce Committee's webinar today titled Training the Amish and Other Plain Sect Communities for the Produce Safety Rule. The purpose of this webinar is to answer questions on the how and why to help Amish and other plain sect communities across America meet the training requirements in the Produce Safety Rule. Just to remind you, this session is being recorded. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. And so throughout the presentation, feel free to put your questions in the question and answer box, not the chat box, and we'll be able to answer those at the end. I am really excited today to bring to speak with you Jeff Stoltzfus, who is a Penn State Extension Farm Food Safety Educator in Lancaster County. His work and training in the food safety areas include food safety and FSMA regulations, and he has been working in the plain sect community for over 30 years. I also would like to introduce Luke Laborde. I met Luke several years ago through the produce safety work that I do, and I'm excited to have him back and him bringing this presentation to us. He is a professor of food science and an extension specialist with Penn State. His expertise is in areas including tracking El Mono in produce operations and processing, as well as providing technical assistance to food entrepreneurs, including hazard analysis and risk-based preventative controls. Luke has been involved in many research papers regarding FSMA and food safety. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to Jeff to begin our presentation. And again, welcome everyone.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. Is Brenda, oops, there we go. As Brenda mentioned, I work in Lancaster County. I grew up here. I've been here all my life, but have worked in extension related areas for the last 35 years, working with the plain community. And so we want to talk a little bit today, a little about the Amish and some of the unique aspects of their community. So let's see if I have control here. Well,
just click the screen one time.
Click the screen one time. Okay. Do it again. Still not working for me.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So to start off a little bit of just about who the Amish and Mennonites are, they're collectively referred to as Anabaptists. They go back to the Reformation, the beginning of Protestantism back in 1525. But they wanted to go a little beyond the Protestant reformers, Martin Luther and Conrad Zwingli. They believed in adult baptism. They were pacifist. They did not believe in taking up arms. And at that time, when the government and the church were all one, and the tax records came from the baptism records, and many of those countries were almost continually at war with one another. Having folks who weren't on the tax rolls and wouldn't take up arms did not endear them to the government. So they suffered a lot of persecution, burnings at the stake and drownings and things like that for the first couple hundred years of their existence. So the Amish trace their roots back to the 1690s. They actually broke away from the Mennonites. The Amish faith followed the teachings of a bishop named Jacob Ammon, who thought that church discipline wasn't being enforced very well with the Mennonite church, and they wanted to be a little more separate from the world. So after moving around Switzerland, Germany, France, in the 1700s and early 1800s, they took William Penn up on his offer for free land in Pennsylvania. And so almost all of the Amish from Europe emigrated to Pennsylvania, and then many of them on to Ohio and other areas. But their desire is still to keep their community as separate and distinct from the outside world as possible. And that, of course, is always a challenge in our modern world. But farming is still because of that, considered to be probably the most desirable occupation. So just to kind of, if you're a visual person, the Anabaptist encompasses a number of different groups. The ones on the right, the Mennonite, the Brethren in Christ, Church of the Brethren, and some others are what we would call assimilated folks. You would not see any difference from any of them if you're walking down the street. And in fact, they are worldwide. The largest population of Mennonites is actually in Africa. They have more than they have in North America. The other side of that bubble there in yellow are what we would call the plain sects, the conservative groups, the Amish, the plain Mennonite, German Baptist, River Brethren. They all have some restrictions on technology or the way they dress or transportation and those types of things. So that's the group that we're going to be talking about. The Amish make up probably the far and away the largest percentage of those folks. There are some old order Mennonites, though, that broke away from Mennonites in 1893 in Lancaster County, and they have now spread throughout the country with a number of settlements in a dozen different states that you see there. But their population is around 25,000, so it's not a huge group. The Amish demographics, some Amish do leave the church, but about 85% remain in the church. Their population, because of that, is doubling about every 20 years. And so if you're going to keep farming and do that, you're going to need to continue to find more land. And so they are constantly starting new settlements, anywhere from 15 to 30 a year around the country as they move into other areas. A lot of these statistics come from the Young Center for Anabaptist and Pietist Studies at Elizabethtown College. So if you really want to dig deep into some of these statistics, the Young Center is the place to go. So we have about 342,000 Amish in North America, in at least 31 states and Canada. Pennsylvania and Ohio kind of go back and forth for the largest populations. Indiana would be third, and then there's a number of other states. And here's the top 12 largest settlements in the country. So you can see Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana are the primary ones, but Illinois, Missouri, New York all have large populations as well. So just to see the change, as we mentioned, so we went from 125,000 in 1992 to over 335,000 in 2019. So it's a very dynamic and growing population. And we find in Pennsylvania that more and more of our vegetable producers are Amish or plain sect growers. Probably as many as 60% now in Pennsylvania of our commercial vegetable growers are plain sect growers of one sort or another. So the Amish view government with some distrust, obviously with a couple hundred years of persecution in their history. And even in this country, to some extent, there was Amish that were arrested by President Washington, President Wilson. It wasn't until World War II that we had an alternative to government, to the draft for those that didn't want to fight. So there's been a long history of some conflict with government. They do not sue or become involved in lawsuits. They did come up with an agreement with government not to pay Social Security. They do pay other taxes, income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, all those kind of things, but they do not participate in the Social Security system. They don't pay in, they don't receive any government payments. As part of that agreement, a lot of Amish feel like they shouldn't take any government aid. So that sometimes plays out in the form of cost share for conservation practices or for those kind of things. They're very reluctant to take government grants or money for those types of things. So that varies somewhat from group to group and from church to church. The last point there is that every church district, which is about 30 to 50 families, have their own bishop. So there's a general set of rules, but the bishop has a lot of latitude in his area as to what he does and doesn't allow. So some groups are going to be more tolerant of government programs than others. So you'll find that as you work with a variety of groups. And there may be a variety of groups existing within, one particular county because there are disagreements among the groups. So in Lancaster County, we have several different groups here in the county. So that's kind of the quick of who the Amish are, but I want to talk a little bit more now about how to reach the Amish as an extension or government agencies. They are relational, and I think we all are at some point, but we've all become so accustomed to websites, to Googling things, to webinars like this, which take away some of the interpersonal experience. So they still very much rely on working with people they know and trust, and that trust is an individual thing. They trust me, not necessarily Penn State. They trust you, not necessarily who you work for. They work on a very individual basis. It's not hard to work in the community. It's not hard to get to know them. But yeah, they don't pay attention really to who I work for. Some folks that I work with for 30 years still aren't sure what Penn State Extension really is. They are well connected with each other. They interact a lot. News travels fast in that community. Good practices travel fast. When we've done work in that community, if you do something and it works, the word gets around. If you do something and it doesn't work, the word gets around. So it's important when you're working with them to keep that in mind. They read a lot of newsletters, circle letters, which for maybe the millennials, if you don't know what a circle letter is, it's one of those things where a group of a dozen friends will write a letter to one person. They write a letter and they send both letters to the next person, and then they add to it. And so eventually that letter comes back to you with 12 different letters on it, and you throw out the last one that you wrote and you add a new one, and you just keep sending that letter around. So that's one way they interact. They have their own newspapers and publications. And conference calls have become a big source of interaction and information. I think there's a conference call almost every night of the week. Some of these calls, and most of these calls, are nationwide. So you can get on that call and there may be 100 people on there from 20 different states, and you get to find out what's happening in the community in Wisconsin, or you get to find out the news from, the different communities, what the big issues are of the day. I'm sure they talk about the weather, how crops are growing, all those kind of things. So back when COVID hit in March of 2020, we were just about to start our produce auction season. There's about 100, between 90 and 100 wholesale produce auctions, primarily in plain communities around the country. And everyone was concerned about how are we going to manage a produce auction in COVID. And so I decided on a Tuesday or Wednesday that, hey, maybe it'd be a good idea to do a weekly conference call through this time. So I decided to do it on the following Monday night, and contacted a few of the Amish folks I know from other states that were connected to a number of the produce auctions out there. And by the following Monday, I think I had 100 callers and 30 auctions, I think, from 7 different states represented on that call. And it was just an informational call to share what we were hearing about COVID and how different produce auctions were handling it. It was a very popular conference call for about 6 or 8 weeks as we went through that. So there's a lot of ways that they interact. They do a great job of marketing programs. So our FSMA training efforts, as I mentioned, about 60% of our produce growers are plain sect growers, and that percentage is growing. Produce especially is an area of agriculture where they are expanding rapidly. They've traditionally been dairy farmers. Dairy has not been good to the Amish farms the past number of years. So here in Pennsylvania, we've done over 70 FSMA trainings. Not all of those folks were attendees, but probably 30 to 50% of those attendees were probably Amish. We have done FSMA trainings for exclusively Amish groups in some cases. An auction or a cooperative would call me and say, hey, we want to do a FSMA training just for our growers. And so we would do that. Sometimes that means we do it at their location, at their auction, which may or may not have access to electricity. So we may or may not be able to use PowerPoint. And Luke will talk about our alternative there a little bit later. So we've done trainings just for them. It's important that, let me see what I'm getting. Yeah. So it's important that we, if we're going to do that, that we do it in a setting that they're comfortable with, that we use trainers who understand their growing practices. So we've relied on our extension agents, who have worked with them and who have developed that relationship with them in the community. The nice thing about doing a training with an Amish group like that is that they really take care of the marketing. We don't have to worry about sending out email blasts or getting the word out. They do that through their own channels at the auction. And so, when I do a training that's sponsored by a produce auction or a co-op, I know I've probably got 30 or 40 or 50, in some cases 100 people in the room, and I don't have to worry about doing a lot of marketing. So we try to do those trainings in environments where we know that they're going to feel comfortable. So auctions, community centers, fire halls, those kind of places. I've even done them. I've had meetings in growers' homes or in their basements already as well. So in 2011, an organization, well, back when FSMA was just becoming a new thing, Raymond Yoder from Fredericksburg, Ohio, has a business called Yoder's Produce. He's sells produce supplies and has been a leader in the plain community in Ohio and really throughout the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic states. And he produces a little weekly or bi-weekly newsletter called Truck Patch Connections, and he was called to testify at some of the early hearings that FDA had about produce safety. And he tells the story of going to, I'm thinking it was Chicago, along with another Amish leader to testify at a hearing on the impact of food safety on growers. Raymond's comment was that FDA got up and talked for 58 minutes and had 2 minutes of questions. He said, we got up and talked for 2 minutes and had 58 minutes of questions. Because at that time, I don't think FDA really understood the scope of the produce industry in the plain communities in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania and Indiana and Kentucky and Wisconsin and all those places. They didn't realize how many growers there were. They didn't realize that you could make a living on 30 acres of produce. And so they challenged Raymond to, one of the things Raymond said he wanted to do was they wanted to provide the education for the plain community. And so FDA challenged him to put together a committee that would help him work with these 100 produce auctions and cooperatives scattered around the country. And that was about the time that I was working mostly in produce and agronomic crop production in Lancaster County, and this food safety thing was becoming a national topic. And I reached out to Raymond because I knew he was doing a lot in that area, and he said, we're putting together a committee and I want you to be on it. So I am the only non-Amish or conservative person on that committee, but it's a committee of about 10 folks made up from Ohio, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Indiana. And they each kind of split up, they each take responsibility for the auctions in their communities. And most of these auctions hold trainings every winter for their growers. And so these folks on the committee have reached out to those auctions and have spoken at these produce auctions now for the past 10 to 12 years about food safety, about FSMA, about gaps, and all those things. They have also been very involved in the rulemaking as we went through that process of coming up with regulations for FSMA, and even now with the Subpart E regulations, they are commenting on that. They've been to Beltsville to meet with FDA on a number of occasions. FDA has been out to Raymond's home and farm. So there's been a very good dialogue between the Plain community and FDA throughout FSMA. And some of these leaders now have gone through the FSMA Train the Trainer. Some of them are trainers or lead trainers, and they have been they've been working with some of the trainings. I know Kentucky does a lot of trainings with Lloyd Schrock, an Amish grower down there, and we have utilized an Amish grower here, Benny Yoder, to help us with a number of our trainings, and that has worked very well. But we estimate there's about 25,000 small vegetable growers that are commercially growing produce for these auctions, most of whom, 90% probably of whom are Plain Sect growers. So we've really, that committee continues to meet once a year in person, and then we have monthly conference calls, and they have really led the way. I think in a lot of ways, the Plain community has been more aware of FSMA and its impact on produce growers than even our non-Amish community, and that's been a great benefit to that Plain community. So with that, I will turn it over to Luke to talk about some of the things that we have done at Penn State to help engage the Amish communities.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll just start off by saying that this was part of a grant, a USDA Food Safety Outreach Program grant, I think, 2016, where we proposed to develop an alternative curriculum, and we based it on what's already known about teaching different groups that maybe don't fit the norm. And we had earlier done some work with the mushroom industry and Spanish harvesters, and we found that, food safety training was most effective when you consider cultural, economic, and social factors of the audience. And then other people also have been involved in research in this area, and the scale of operation, the preferred learning methods, cultural factors all play a role in how training can be effective and who can get access to it. We do know Amish growers in settlements where cultural norms limit the use of technology may be at risk for unintentional exclusion from training courses. And so we know that not all Amish have issues with electricity and technology, but there's enough that are in that nature that there could be some exclusion, and we want to get everybody involved. So how do we modify the curriculum? Well, the Food and Drug Administration in their produce safety regulation does permit modification of the curriculum through the Produce Safety Alliance, as long as the course equivalence can be demonstrated. And I should say they're very vague on that at the time. It has been resolved pretty much, but at the time we were just going by that statement and kind of playing it by ear about how we could adapt it and trying to play it safe so we didn't veer too far from it. Oh, I gotta click. Yeah, I gotta do this. That's right. Okay, here we go. So as you know, the current curriculum was developed by the Produce Safety Alliance out of Cornell University. And it is a PowerPoint-based curriculum with a set of slides and then a grower training manual. The original manual was version 1.01. It's been modified to 1.1, and it consists of 267 slides, and it is synced with the grower training manual so that people can, as they view the slides, they can go through and underline things, and they even provided yellow marker pens to underline things. So we didn't want to lose that. So our adaptation was to take this grower keep the grower training manual, of course, because that is required, but convert those slides into something that could be presented without any electricity, without any technology, just as a book. And so we printed and adapted slides to be used alongside that version 1.0 manual. The slide content is basically the same though. Where it was necessary to enhance some of the graphics and slides so we could get it on a print form and not in a lower resolution PowerPoint form, we did that. And what we came up with was these books. We call them slide books, for lack of a better word. And the point here is that these books are reusable. And just like you don't collect the slides after a presentation, the participants don't do that. They do not collect the slide books. They are reusable. So the educator keeps the slide books and can use them for later workshops. The participants do keep the grower manual, just as they do for the regular PSA curriculum done through PowerPoint. Now, this is an example of some of the pages where we took the slides out, enhanced them as best we could. We didn't want to go out and recreate the whole thing because this slide set is huge, but we wanted to get it in a form where we could get the text, they could see the slide in a big enough form so they can, figure it out, but keeping that text and working closely as we go through the slides. We give them instructions early on in the beginning of the book, explaining how to follow along using the two books, the trainer manual and the slide set. We go through the same modules. It's pretty much a parallel experience. It's just that it is now printed and viewable. So here's some examples of what some of the pages would look like. You noticed in the we keep there's a number in the upper left-hand corner of each page or each section of the page that corresponds to that point in the grower manual. So it's synced and they can follow along. Here's an example of how it might look on a desk. We have our slide book open in the center top. We have the grower manual to the left with the very nice yellow highlight pens and a place for notes as well. This is, and I just want to make sure we get this across, that these the materials we have the supplemental materials are available at no cost except for shipping. So we did print out quite a few of these. We've given many out. And what we'll do, if anyone wants to use this as training people in their area, we will ship them out at no cost except for shipping costs. We do limit it to 20 per institution. One thing that we have found is that you don't need one slide book for each person. And we had pretty good success with just having two adjacent people share the view of the slide book, perhaps even propping it up a tiny bit so it's easier to see. But each person would get the grower training manual as is required by the Produce Safety Alliance. So here's an example of one of our sessions we did down in southern Pennsylvania, and you can kind of roughly see that plenty of space. They can lay it out, they can look at the slide book, and they can also follow along with the produce PSA grower training manual, which they then take that home. So we tried to come up with an experimental plan, and I'll tell you, it's difficult. It was difficult because, as Jeff said, you don't have to do a lot of marketing, but you work through leader groups. And so we didn't have a lot of control about, randomizing things and all that, but we were very successful in getting 4 workshop locations set up. 2 are in central Pennsylvania, around kind of close to the State College area where I'm in right now, and also the southeastern part of Pennsylvania, which is northern Lancaster area. So we had 78 participants. So we had these 4 locations, and at 2 of the locations we did the slide book approach, and at 2 of the other we did the computer PowerPoint. And again, many Amish will accept the computer presentations. I think we found it a little more conservative up in the central part of the state than in Lancaster County, but you can't make gross judgments and generalizations, but it kind of leaned towards that way. So we did these in 2018 and 19. We had hoped to do some more in 2020 and all, but well, we got shut down. So we decided to report our results as we have them. So after we did them, we did some valuations and some demographic questionnaires, and we found typical demographics that we might have expected. That almost 99% of them were male. They were almost 2/3 were between 15 and 40 years old. The number of years of farming was about 3/4 was up to 20 years, and many had more years experience. Their education, which is typical of Amish, the Amish culture, is 8th grade education, 95%. Some had a high school diploma, but very few. Also associates and bachelors, very few. So we did the booklet method or the slide book method for 55% of them, and the PowerPoint for 45%. So we tried to split it up as best we could, according to those 4 locations. We did 20-question multiple choice pre and post tests. We wanted to look at key metrics and definitions covered in the produce safety rule. Things like the crops cover, the standards for agricultural water, animal manure, record keeping, and training requirements, because that's a big part of this curriculum. Some awareness of animals and soil issues, manure, intrusion of animals, some sanitation questions on food contact surfaces, post-harvest cleaning and sanitizing, and wash water disinfection. And then finally, personal hygiene related to hand use or hand washing, use of hand sanitizers, reportable signs of illness, and visitor policies. So we framed these questions. We gave the same questions before the workshop and after the workshop to see, what we're really looking for was the equivalence of the curriculum. We're not looking for the success of this curriculum. whether it's in either form, because there are some problems, as we'll say, but whether it was equivalent and therefore could be used to achieve this certification. Our results were, to sum it up, that we found no significant difference in knowledge gains between the computer-based versus the slide book workshop. So that was good. And this then suggested that there was equivalence in the two learning methods based on how FDA had defined that. When we dug a little deeper, and this is in the publication we have, and you can dig a little deeper into all these results, the pre-workshop scores were lowest for metrics and definitions within the produce safety rule. The particulars about what exactly is required and how much E. coli you can have in the soil, and things like that. But there were significant post-workshop knowledge gains. The pre-workshop scores were highest for animal and manure risks and personal hygiene. And we thought, well, this is some of the things that we emphasized quite a bit with our earlier good agricultural practices training, which we had done a lot with the Amish before. However, and this agreed with some other people who did some studies on this, there was too many who scored low on pre and post tests, indicating that this single one-day training is not sufficient to ensure that all growers are knowledgeable about farm food safety. So this doesn't say what the issue is with the slide book versus computer, but the way FDA had set this up as a one-day training, really, it's not something you could just check off and say, okay, they know it all, everything. So continuing supplementary training, we concluded, was essential. So we wrote this up. I think it's pretty readable. It's kind of, we go through the nuances of how we set this up and the background information, some of our limitations, and a little more analyzing the pre and post workshop scores and making some conclusions. So we have, we mentioned that the continuing, training is needed beyond this certification workshop, which I think we find too often that certification workshops just kind of leave it there, but there needs to be a follow-up and there needs to be contact and regular upgrading based on the changes in regulations such as we know are occurring with the soils and water issues. But part of the produce safety regulation, the PSR, requires harvesters and handlers to receive basic hygiene and sanitary practices training for preventing produce contamination. So that's beyond the certification course. It's what those who take the certification course should take home with them to their farm and train their food handlers and harvesters. So we developed a flip chart approach. Specifically, we have done them previously for Spanish-speaking audiences, and we said, well, let's do one for Amish farm workers. And we developed a self-standing, durable, 44-page, reasonable flip chart, 17 by 11-inch spiral bound. It's hopefully durable and that they can be used over and over and over again. We had over 35 images professionally drawn that we really hope and believe reflect Amish growing activities in a culturally appropriate manner. And here's where we use the food safety group among the Amish and got their feedback on it, just as we did with the slide book. To, is this the reality of it? Of course, Jeff is our intermediary quite a bit, and he showed it to them, and they really liked it, I believe. So just some examples of some of the drawings we had. We keep it simple, so the flip chart sets on a table or truck bed or whatever, and the educator, the trainer, reads the back where there's more details, and they make sure they cover it all. And on the other side, which we see to the right, would be the images in a larger format, but following exactly along, facing the audience. Here's some other drawings that we had made up. Again, we're very fortunate to have a really nice artist do these, and we had a lot of discussions about, well, what should these suspenders look like? What do the jeans look like? And all this kind of stuff. And then at the same time, looking at some of the big issues. In the middle, we have some produce that's contacted the ground. So here's a chance for us to say, well, if it contacts the ground, you really shouldn't use it. And then also containers that contact the ground, and how do we deal with that? And then here's one of some melon harvesting, and this is typical of how it's done, where the horse-driven wagon would come on the side of the fields. It would pick them and pass them along and place them into the containers that are then sent off to either the produce auction or distributor, whatever. Also, we know there's certain dynamics within the Amish culture, and here's the elder on the left and the young guy on the right. And here we're encouraging, the text on the back of this would be say, you know, if you see anything, if you see some animal droppings in the field, you should report that to your supervisor. And that's to encourage that. We do have all of the material I'm mentioning right now is on this website, which I think is in your chat right now. And you will see examples of, you'll see how you might actually obtain some of these slide books. Basically, the procedure is to email me, and then I forward it, and then they just charge you for the postage. But here at this website, we have information, and we have some sample views of materials. We have articles, including this recently published one on the study, and ordering information. So again, the slide books are at no cost except for shipping to educators who work or teach PSA workshops while supplies last. I think we have maybe a couple hundred. So, you know, if you need some, get some. You're welcome to them. We anticipate we base this on version 1.1, but there's a version 1.2. So we have included supplementary materials that are required by the Produce Safety Alliance to be included and inserted into this curriculum. It's probable there will be a major upgrade to 2.0 at some point, and we'll see what we need to do. But so we'd like to get rid of these so that we can think about what are we going to do when version 2.0 comes out. So again, the best way, if you're interested in those, is to contact me at lfl5@psu.edu or my phone number 814-863-2298. We have additional resources on that page. We have some articles by Jeff and Tom Ford, another educator in Pennsylvania. This is a Zoom recording, getting a little more detail about the Amish community and the Anabaptist in general and the different groups. Jeff has an article working with plain sect growers, and we have a link to that Young Center for Anabaptist and Pietist Studies in Elizabethtown College. And this is my favorite picture that was drawn about, you know, should children be working in the fields? And boy, this kid, he really wants to go work in that field. And that's probably his older sister saying, no, you're not ready yet, because what the regulation says, it needs to be understandable. The curriculum, you can't just parrot it out. They need to understand it before they should be out picking produce that's covered under that rule. So that is my presentation. I guess we can leave it to any questions that might be up or.
Okay, well, thank you, Jeff and Luke. And we do have some questions, and I am going to start with the first one. Are the newsletters in the Amish community, like the one mentioned by Mr. Yoder, accessible to English or just Amish patrons? And Jeff, I'll let you answer that one out loud for us.
Yeah, so the one I referred to, the Truck Patch Connections, that's published by Yoder's Produce. You can, there is a subscription to that. There are a number of others. the Buttschaft is one. Those anyone can subscribe to. Predominantly, I would say probably 90% of their circulation is in the Plain community, but anyone can get those. There's a lot a lot of articles in there just about what people write in with a little diary, and they say, well, last Sunday we went to see Ben Fisher's, and it's a lot of that kind of folksy kind of stuff, but it is widely read in that community, and it's a great place to advertise upcoming trainings or things like that. So
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what was the percentage of work animals versus mechanical equipment in your sample? And I'm going to throw this, Luke, I'm with Jeff. Did you talk about this, or Luke? Who I don't remember.
Better give that to Jeff. I don't think we surveyed for that, their specific practices.
Right.
We assumed some uniformity, and I don't know. That's a general cultural question.
yeah, we didn't really ask that question at the training. We were looking at pretty much how the training went. I would say that with the Amish community, of the people that we worked with, probably 95% were using draft horses. The conservative Mennonite groups that we work with, what we call the plain Mennonite groups, they do use steel wheel tractors in the field in place of draft horses, but predominantly almost 90 to 95% of the Amish that we worked with are using draft horses in the field.
Okay. I have a two-part question for you. I'm going to ask the second part first. Have any of the bishops voiced a concern about female presenters of training information?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, and we've talked about this, and I talked with one of our female educators who's relatively new in one of our communities that has a lot of Amish. The Amish work well with female educators. I would say the issues of trust there again are the same for women as men. There are a few things when I go onto an Amish farm. You dress conservatively, and that's true for men as well as women. Not when I say conservatively, not you don't need to dress up. They're not impressed by a tie, but you dress modestly. Yeah, for the most part, I know at Penn State in our horticulture fields, we have female educators that are often sought out because of their expertise and their ability to relate well to the Amish community. And so, yeah, that's generally not an issue.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then the other question is, have you worked much with OSU's food safety team to reach the Southeast Ohio population?
I don't know. I've worked with Ohio State somewhat. We've talked on a couple of occasions on some projects we were working on. I don't know about that particular group in Southeast Ohio. Most of my interaction with the Amish in Ohio has been in the Holmes and Wayne County area. In that area, again, Ohio State has
some out. I sent some slide books out to Ohio State. We've got a list someplace, but we have sent them out to many states, and so somebody there has a set.
Okay. All right. We have time for one more question. If anyone has anything they'd like to put in the chat, in the question and answer box. I see one just pop up. Have you been able to tell if these groups would prefer smaller, shorter trainings or a full day to get it over with in regards to training?
This is probably the same for the Plain communities as everyone. They'd probably all like it to be shorter, but I think so. It becomes an issue of logistics for anybody. If you have a 2-day meeting, that means you have to go there twice. For the Amish, if it's beyond horse and buggy driving distance. That means they're going to have to hire a driver to get them there. If we have it over 2 days, that means they have to hire a driver twice. So it's going to double their transportation costs. So yeah, that's probably everyone would like it to be shorter, probably, but it seems the 1 day seems to work better than a 2 day. The one thing, I will mention, the Amish speak a Pennsylvania German dialect, but they do not learn to read or write it very well. They learn English in school. And so when we talked about developing a curriculum for them, it wasn't about making it in German. It was they read English well. And I remember asking our one Amish fellow, I said, just for the record, I said, I want to make sure that you don't need this in German. And he said, no, but he said, plain English would be really helpful. And we all just kind of laughed because we said, yes, everyone would like to see it in plain English.
Absolutely. Okay, great answer. Great answer. Another question. So when visiting a farm, would you suggest wearing plain clothes instead of a uniform to help them feel more comfortable?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, a uniform is probably not going to be helpful. Plain clothes, jeans, and a nice shirt is fine, or any long pants and uniforms I think would be a little more intimidating. Yeah, so
Okay.
I'd dress casual.
Okay. And we have a question. Do you have any tips for finding and contacting Amish growers in states where there are very few Amish growers?
So when I work in communities, you find out where they interact, and that's kind of hard to do if you don't have a lot. If you're in one of those states where they've just started a new settlement, you'll soon find that there's going to be an Amish store, maybe an Amish farm supply store, maybe a produce auction. Those places, if you go to those places, introduce yourself to the management, to the growers, explain what you're trying to do, what program you're trying to do, offer to put some, a flyer up there or something like that. That's kind of how our educators have gotten involved in the community. So if you're working in horticulture, you go to a produce auction, and start chatting with the growers. That's probably the best way to get started.
You might contact your extension educators at your land grant university, because in the production side, they might have had some contact with the Amish and can help you out there.
Okay. Well, we've already received one comment that this is an excellent presentation, so I'm going to take that cue and thank you both so very much for being here for us today. I appreciate the opportunity to have you provide your expertise and knowledge to a group of people who are desperately just looking to make sure that they're doing a good job in whatever area and state and region they are in the country. Again, thank you, Jeff and Luke, for your presentation. We appreciate it. And we thank everyone for being here today. And we will we have recorded this and we'll send it out to everyone so that you have the information again, as well as the links at the end that you're able to go in and find the information to be able to get the resources if you're interested. Thank you again, and you all have a great day. On behalf of AFDO, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks.